How's it going, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing great. Thank you, sir, for taking some time out here for this wonderfully intriguing game, Fictional Boxing Universe. He's got a group on Facebook, Mr. Ronnie Wyatt. You're upstate New York from us, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're in Syracuse.
Is this your first time designing a game? You must be a long-time gamer designer.
No, yeah. It's the longtime gamer, but this is actually the first game. I actually have a bowling game I've kind of played around with to see if I could get working, but not really happy with it. And honestly, I didn't even plan on designing this boxing game, but it just kind of happened. So yeah, so this is actually the first game.
So, Fictional Boxing Universe dice game. I'll just read an excerpt from your Facebook page, your group. You've got a lot of the files there. It's in beta testing. If this doesn't sound exciting, I don't know what
Yeah. Oh,
does.
definitely. Yeah.
Most fights were unlimited rounds. You can do that in this game. Most fights only ended when a fighter could not continue. You can do that in this game. His first era is the London Ring Prize Rules era. What gave you the inspiration to go back this far and try to document the game to this extent?
It was totally by, I will say, accident and mistake. So I really wasn't planning on creating a boxing game in general, and I had never played a boxing game, cards and dice boxing game. I played the computer games, the Lance Haffner TKO years ago, and the Title Bout computer game. I play that, but I had never ever played a boxing one. And so what ended up happening was that, and I'm a huge, let me go ahead and say this, I'm a huge Roberto Chiavini fan, with all of his games, love his games. And the first games that I ever bought from him were I bought the complete boxing, Olympics boxing set that started like in 1920 all the way up to current day, which was really, really interesting. But they're basically very quick play games, And so then he came out with, over the last year or so, Noble Arts of Boxing game, which is a little more in depth. And I think the game itself only has maybe three ratings, knockouts for, knockouts against, and boxer quality, and I think fight quality or something like that. And so one day I was, as I was playing his game, I said, I'd like to add a little, as they say, add a little more meat to the bone of the game. And I remember that many years ago, I mean, many years ago, almost, well over 20 years ago, Anthony, the creator of Glory Days Boxing, um, we were all part of the same Title Bout Championship Boxing Forum for the game, the computer game, right? And Anthony came up with a set of charts that where you could roll before your matches, and it could do anything. It could do injuries or out of the ring type thing. And I thought, I think I might add something like that to this game that I'm already playing here, because I'd never played a cards and dice game in general. And then when I did that, and I thought, well, I I think also I would like to add, and then I began with this kind of set of homebrews for the Roberto Chiavini's wonderful games. And as the homebrews, the more homebrews I added, I realized I wasn't playing the game anymore at all. It was not even the same game
Mhm.
anymore. I mean, as an example, I once I said, okay, well, I'm gonna use these charts for, like, and I call them the lifestyle charts, which means that you will roll to see how a boxer comes to the ring, and it could be affected by his training or her training or outside events, things like that, right? So I said, well, if I do that, I got to make it affect the game. So how am I going to make it affect the game? So I said, well, maybe I could either increase their rating or drop their rating, depending on how they come to the game, right? You have to excuse my dogs. Apparently, the mailman is here, and
Yeah.
but yeah. So I said, well, so the lifestyle training's got to affect something. So then I began working on, well, let me give all these fighters a overall talent rating. And then the lifestyle role will affect the talent rating. Either, and that would be like their overall, that's the main rating for them, right? And I said, well, if they come to the ring, great shape, they'll have a better rating. If they come in not good shape, they'll have a lower rating. But then it dawned on me, well, I don't even know what I'm gonna use this rating for. What is it? How is it going to affect the game? And that's when I realized, okay, I'm not even playing the same game I was playing anymore. So I created a punches landed chart, right, for using the talent rating thing. And you would roll, looking at the talent rating, roll the dice, find the column, whatever the fighter is rated, and I decided it would be somewhere between 0 to 14, 15, whatever. And, the greater the fighter, the higher the number, the not so great, the lower the number. And you would roll the column and see how many punches they land, which was perfect. And I said, well, that's how you score the round. But then I realized, well, how am I going to score the round? I don't even know how to score the round. So then I created a different chart. I created another chart that said, well, if the punches, because what you would do, you would roll for each punches landed for each fighter, right? And there would be a difference usually. Sometimes it would be the same, but usually it would be a difference, one higher than the other. So whatever, you would subtract the lowest from the highest and come up with the difference. And the difference, I said, well, I'm gonna make the difference determine how to score the round. As an example, like say if the difference in punches landed is only 4 or 5 or lower, then call it a draw, because it's not that big a difference. If it's up to maybe 10 fights different, well, it might be a 10-9 round. Or if it's 12 to 15 punches different, it could be a 10-8 round. And then I decide, okay, well, if it's like 14 punches difference, it's an automatic knockout, which all make perfectly good sense to me. But then I realized, I said, well, I need to create a knockdown chart. And then, for so it's just, I've just got all of these charts that I'm making that no longer have anything to do with the original game that I was playing, as great as that game was. I just realized I'm doing something totally different here. And so I said, well, once I figured out the knockdown chart, I figured, boxing games, baseball games, football games, all of the games use some sort of statistic from the sport to where you gather your ratings of some sort, right? And I mean, if it's baseball, you look at a hitter's averages, home runs, doubles, triples, stolen bases, whatever, and somehow or another you convert that into a rating to use in your game engine. So I figured, well, boxing's got to be the same. I mean, it's not but so many different things you can grade somebody on a boxing match for. So I looked at the obvious, how good are they knocking other people out? So I come up with a power punching rating. And I said, well, if you're going to give somebody a rating on how good they are at knocking somebody out, you got to determine how good somebody is at punch. So now they need either a jaw rating or a chin rating, as something like that. And then, so I created charts for that, and then I created a chart for because then I said, well, surely in fights there's got to be cuts, got to be fouls. And so now it's just become something just totally that I was not planning at all. And then I figured out, well, maybe I ought to give them a popularity rating too. Not necessarily how fan favorite they are, but how well. So once I did that, I said, well, I could actually use that to affect the scoring, because sometimes if a fight's close, the judges lean more into the the more popular of the boxers. So I adjusted the scoring chart. So since this is a beta, I'm always changing and adjusting and tweaking something I don't like, or whatever. And so I started doing it. So then I said, well, if I do the popularity thing like that, I could actually use that to determine if I added an optional rule, you could figure out the venue and the attendance if you wanted to. And I'm like, so it just kept piling on. And so what I decided to do once I kind of had what I thought was going to be pretty interesting game, then it became to be just to create fighters. Now the deal with me is like like I have for years been an out of the park baseball, computer baseball fan, but I love playing the fictional leagues. So I created a bunch of random fighters, and I decided that because I talked earlier about playing the Title Bout, Jim Frunzo's Title Bout computer game, the original one back in 2005, and I have an actual boxing universe in that game that is in real life 13 years old, and I started with boxers in 1880, and right now I'm just up to 1981, and it's taken me 13 years to get that far. Yeah, so I said with this game, for some reason I just have the number 1880 in my mind. I said I'm gonna create fighters from 1880 on up to 2022 because they're all big way. It really wouldn't require a whole lot of historical, research on that part of it. So I created all the fighters, and I had fighters from 1880 to 2022, and I had everything set up and really liked it. And like I said, I had created the scoring that if depending on how many of the difference between the punches landed, determined on what the score was, whether it was a 10-10 round or a 10-9 round or a 10-8 round, and or knockout. But then it dawned on me, they didn't always use the 10-point system. So I had to do some research on that. So I did some research on that and saw that didn't come into place until about the late 60s. So I said, well, if I'm going to use fighters before those dates, I got to come up with a different scoring chart. And then it hit me, wait a minute. Boxing has evolved a lot over the years. So I just started doing research, just trying to understand better the eras of boxing. I know there was the bare knuckle era, and then doing the research, I realized there was the London ring prize rule area where you could no longer fight, no longer bite, you couldn't gouge eyes anymore. You could still wrestle an opponent to the ground, to the mat, but you couldn't go lower body. You had to do upper body, and this is boxing. And so this is the beginning of the London ring prize era. And I thought, well, that's really neat. Once I realized that the London ring prize rules, how different they were than our quote unquote modern rules, I said, well, that's really interesting. Maybe I can adapt that era of the game to be different. And then I noticed that the next era was the Marquis of Queensberry boxing rules. And I noticed they changed some things. The simple truth was I never planned on creating a boxing game in the first place. Never my plan. It just began to evolve when I wanted to add a little more meat to the meal. And it just blew up and blew up and blew up. And so, like I said, when I created the first, quite a few heavyweight boxers, like I said, they're all random anyway, since it's fictional. From 1880 up to modern time, I realized, well, boxing evolved, so some things are different. So truthfully, what has happened, the game that I never intended to create has now probably going to be 5 different games, maybe 6, depending on the era. And what it really means is that it's all the basis of the same game, but the game charts are slightly different depending on the era. And so I've been doing just so much research in the last month, a couple of months maybe, just trying to find out what some of these different rules were as the eras changed. In fact, this morning I've spent time looking at boxing from, say, 1920 to 1950s, which was really, many would call the mafia boxing era. And so, right? And so I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, well, I've got to add some things to the game. If I have that era, that affects what could affect some of those things, So I'm doing some research on that. I'll share with you some of the different rules so far. Now, these are just the ones that I've come up with of how the game is evolving. And so I've got the first 2 or 3 eras pretty much complete, but I'm still tweaking and playing with it. Now up on the Facebook page, you can download the just in the files, no charge for anything, but the London Prize Ring Rules era you can download. And I'm still tweaking it, and I want people to play with it just so I can realize what I need to change. But like as an example, the London Prize Rule era, which is like 18. The first set of the London Prize Rules were 1838, but but it wasn't until like 1840 before it kind of spread around and everybody knew what it was. So I have fighters from 1840 to I believe it's 1866, and they use the London Prize Rules. Now the first thing of that is there are no weight classes, but weight did matter. So you can't say that it doesn't matter. So I still have the boxers broken down into 4 basic sizes, either heavyweight, middleweight, lightweight, or featherweight. Now in that version of the game, you will adjust a fighter's rating if he's heavier than the other one to give him an advantage.
Now, are you creating these fictional boxers, or are you allowing users to also create their own?
Oh, users can definitely create. In fact, a good friend of mine, Paul, he created. I need to make sure I got to give him the credit for it. He came up with a random rolling system of creating individual boxers for yourself that we've included with the game. I mean, he did a great job with it. So you could do that, or if you just randomly whatever you wanted to. But the random roll dice really makes it interesting to do that because, like I said, when we talked about the lifestyle rating, that could be anything from somebody who comes to the ring usually in top condition or a part-timer who this is not his real job, so he's very seldom in top condition. You may even have somebody who likes to party too much. You might have somebody who has a lot of problems outside of the ring that are not necessarily the party and pop. There's got a lot of stuff going on. So all that affects, it can affect different things in the game. And so with that, I even realized then, and again, using Anthony's chart and he gave me permission to use his charts that he did them as a freeware. Like I said, it was probably 15 years ago on the Title Bout forum. And so I've kind of adapted quite a bit of it. And, but I even looked at the lifestyle chart things. I realized, I said, okay, well, that's got to change for the era too, because nobody's going to get popped in 1866 for steroids. Right. So I had to really begin to adapt everything. But so for the, there's no weight classes in the first era, which is going to be from 1840 to 1866, I believe it is. Sometimes they had a set number of rounds. Most of the time they didn't. You just fought till someone couldn't continue. And they didn't have time limits on the rounds. The only way around it is when somebody went down. Now, if you think about that concept and you read about people fighting 60 rounds, that means somebody got knocked down 59 times before it ended. You know what I'm saying?
It's funny because
it's just amazing.
It's like you think about the Rocky movie. It sounds kind of cinematic. You think about Rocky. It's like there's no way somebody could last for this number of rounds. But apparently there's some.
Yeah, well, but even in that era, though, the round could only be 2 or 3 seconds long. It wasn't 3 minutes. It was when you got knocked down. And of course, many of the fighters were known to fake it so they could take a breather. They would take a hit and just lay down just so they could get a breather, because then they had 30 seconds rest after they got knocked down, and then they had to what was called approach the scratch, which was just a line in the middle of the ring. You had to be up to scratch when they said time, start fighting again. And if you didn't, it was over with, right? So I had my scorecards that I'd created set up for 15 rounds at the most. But then I realized, no, I need to create some scorecards that have 20 rounds, 40 rounds, 60 rounds, 100 rounds. If somebody really wants to play it that way. Another difference was, like I said, they didn't have the 10-point must system. But the London Ring Prize rules, one of the main things that they stopped was biting, eye gouging, kicking, headbutting, low blows, and illegal wrestling. So I thought, well, you know what? I need to have those things in the fouls part of the game, in the fouls, because hey, if now they're just finally getting called, there could be somebody still doing them. So that game is totally different than the original game I made, even though it's the same basis, same way of playing. It's just that it's different. Then when you got to the Marquis of Queensberry rules, many fights were still unlimited, but they were no longer, it no longer required a knockdown to end the fight. It was 3-minute rounds, totally different rule. So added that to it. Upper body wrestling became illegal in 1866. You could still upper body wrestle, even though you couldn't lower body wrestle under the London rules. Then from 1876 to almost 1919 is really what's known as the outlaw era, when boxing was illegal in many states, almost all the states of the United States, and in many countries, boxing was illegal for that time. The thing that you run into there is that there are many fights that ended when the police entered the ring and stopped the fight. And you can even see a lot of fights on YouTube, where they have some of those fights in the early 1900s, just clips of them. And you can see policemen entering the ring, stopping everything. So that brought another idea. Well, they couldn't really advertise, not everywhere. So you didn't have bigger crowds then as you would normally. They fought in fields. They fought in, little clubs. They fought on barges. Some of the bigger fights were held on barges that would only hold a couple of hundred people, but they could be out on the water, so the police couldn't get to them to stop the fight. So I thought, well, we got to do the outlaw era of boxing. So I've got to have where the police can interrupt some matches on that one. And then, of course, when you get to the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, again, the mafia era, where there's, I'm doing some research on that now, and that's just mind-boggling how much they did really control. And so I'm gonna try to figure out a way to fit that into the game. But basically, like I said, I never intended to make a game in the first place. I was just trying to add a few homebrew rules that blew up into something that I was never planning, and then they even blew up into something else, because once I realized that there's so many different eras, it would be neat to watch it actually unfold. Now, one day I would really love to, create real fighters. One day I would like to do that. And many years ago, I'm talking about even longer than 15 years ago, I would say 20 some years ago, no, almost 30 years ago, Jim Trunzo wrote a 3-part article of how to create fighters for TKO boxing, for Lance Haffner's TKO boxing. I wouldn't use it exactly like that, but that does give you some ideas of what you should, how to look at regular fighters. So I'd like to do that one day. But I want to get this part off the ground first with the fictional guys. So
that's tremendous. That's awesome. Different countries or different regions, different folks, did some keep better records about certain well-known fighters in these various eras that you're finding?
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, obviously, the first set of rules was the London prize ring rules, and then the Marquis of Queensberry rules. So, so the United States piggybacked off everything that happened there first, almost, and so it's just really interesting. There's some great websites out there that has you can just type in boxing rules, and it'll give you the breakdown of every one that happened, how they unfolded and everything. So yeah, so it's just really good. But yeah, definitely there are other, as you're doing the research, some of it's easier to come across than others. You know what, the hardest one, I've even posted on boxing forums asking this question, and it is, when did boxing officially go to judges? I get a lot of, well, around the time of, we know that, but nobody really knows when it actually really started appropriately. Because in the beginning, the like one thing that I've added into the game the early years is that in the beginning, the referee was the only judge. And if it was too close for him to call, he would call it a no decision. But the next morning, the newspapers would decide. And if you go to Box Rec, where they got all the great statistics of fighters, where they keep track of all the fights. Look at some fighters in the early 1900s, and you'll see they have a lot of NWS is the ruling. That means the newspaper writers decided who won. Not the referee, not anybody official, but the newspaper writers decided. So I don't know how they decided, but they did. So it's interesting. Some of the information I'm trying to find is very easy and readily just right there, you can get it. And then some of it is not as easy to find as you want. I know you can look at you can see that in the 20s there started to be some judges added to it, to where the referee was a judge, but then there was usually two outside judges, and they would put their scores together to decide. But you can't really see exactly when it started, but it was around that time. So yeah, some of the information is pretty easy to find. Some of it's not so much.
How's the beta testing progressing? Where have you discarded some mechanics, proved some other ones out that they're working well?
I'm tweaking all the time, more than I even was planning on, because what happens is playing the game myself, I'm looking at it and I'm trying to get input from other people that are playing too. And I have quite a few people that actually will shoot me an email or send me a Facebook message about, do you think maybe you might need to adjust this or adjust that? And then 99.9% of the time, they're absolutely right. We probably do. And so the beta testing is going really well. As an example, I wanted to come up with, because, well, let me say this about the time frame for playing the game. Like, you have some games that are quick play. You roll for the result. Boom. Maybe one or two rolls, you got the result. Then you have the great games like Title Bout, the card game, and which, let me say, like I said, I've never played any other card game until recently. I recently bought Glory Days Boxing, which is fabulous. So I would say if you look at, say, some games are very quick play, and some are more long play, which are kind of almost punch by punch type things. Mine is more round by round, not quite punch by punch, but there's a lot of factors to determine the round. So so I would say it's kind of a medium play game. But I also know that if somebody wanted to do a pretty decent sized boxing universe, sometimes you want to come up with stats faster, than having to individually play each one of them. So I did come up with a quick play version of the game, and hated it right from the beginning. Didn't like it. I just said, this is not what I know I need it. And so that's been changed 30 times. I'll do it and go, no, I don't like this. It's not giving the advantage to who should have an advantage. It's not giving it's just seeing. So yeah, so I have quite a few people that are wonderfully helping out for a game that was never supposed to be created in the first place. It's working out.
It seems like boxing, that's a great video idea, but what do you personally look for in the boxing game? The effects of fatigue, or wingspan, ability to take the punch, etc., all of the above, to varying degrees.
There's two very interesting ratings that I have. One, of course, is the obvious stamina. The total rating is kind of the overall rating, and that's the number you use that you roll with to see how many punches were landed, right? So that can be adjusted by the lifestyle, stuff like that. The other thing that adjusted, as an example, stamina, right? Say that a fighter has a stamina of 7. What that means, in the 7th round, after the 7th round, he starts losing stamina every round after that, right? So say if his regular total rating, which is the main rating for punches landed, if that is a 6, by the time it's a 6 till he gets to the 7th round, and then he loses a point every time. And the lower your total rating, your TR rating, will really lower how many punches you land, so it will directly affect the game. So that's stamina. The another one is called the groove round. Now I know that sounds silly, but just like the stamina is when you're running out of gas, the groove round is when you are actually settling in. Now many fighters, some of them begin as soon as the bell rings, they are ready. But historically, there have been fighters who it took them a couple of 1, 2, sometimes 3 rounds before you could tell they were quote unquote in their groove. When you set your scorecard up, you'll put a mark. Say if his stamina rating is a 7, and let's say his TR rating is a 6. His stamina rating is a 7, which means round 8, 9, and 10 he loses TR. If his groove round's a 3, he won't be at it. He won't be at the 6 until the 3rd round. The first 2 rounds he'll lose a point. It'll be 5. So that'll lower how many punches landed he makes. So, but it's all a shot in the dark right now. I'm still trying to get it all worked out. But it seems to be working pretty good, because you can have somebody's lifestyle, you can have somebody's stamina rating really affect the bout. So
what about setting up a fighter's entire campaign, an entire schedule? And does that kind of, that stamina and fatigue, I would imagine, carries over to some extent?
After I created all of the fighters in the first place, I said, well, there's got to be a way if you want to age these people out, right? So I actually do have an optional rule to show you what to adjust because each one of them do have a debut year and a imaginary birth date, and so you can kind of just gauge and say, well, he's getting to be about 38, he really needs to be slow. And of course, unless you're George Foreman, but anybody else, you probably be slowing off. So there is an optional rule that of some things that you can adjust as a fighter ages out. As an example, he may lose in some areas, but he may gain in some areas, because one of the roles that you do is every round you roll for see who's going to control the round, and when you do that, so kind of the way I adjusted it, if you all adjust for the age, the guy may lose stamina, he may lose even a little bit of the power punching, but he may gain in being able to control more of the rounds, because now he's usually they're smarter fighters because they've been doing this for a long time. So now they learn to win fights, but not out fighting somebody, but out boxing somebody, So there's some adjustments. Then of course I realized that when I do have the arrows unfolding where you are adding the different weight classes, I thought, well, suppose you want to move a fighter up and down a weight class. So I actually have an optional rule to show you what to adjust. Like if a fighter moves up in weight, it might increase his power punching, but he might be slower. He doesn't have the speed that he used to. So he may not be able to cover up. Well, eventually you got to say, okay, that's enough. You just need to stop. Can't add everything. It's just a passion thing right now. I'm just working on. Truthfully, never intended to sell the game, to make anything off of it. I don't know. That has just never crossed my mind. I never even thought about that aspect of it until somebody started asking. And I was like, I never even thought about that. I'm just making a game because I enjoy playing it, and I would like to see it unfold into something that makes sense. Something where you look at it and go, that actually makes pretty good sense. And I think what makes it unique is the eras, though. I think, and like I said, that's a total accident. I wasn't planning on that. I'm at the stage of it now to where I put it aside for a couple of days and then go back and reread everything, all the instructions and everything again for the first era, because it is different than the original game. Just so I can, because sometimes I just need new eyes. Just sometimes when it all becomes Charlie Brown's teacher after a while. Wah 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 wah. And so I really plan to hopefully by next week to be able to say, okay, I think this first era is done, and then I'm gonna work on the next era, and they just keep moving forward in it like that. Like I said, sometimes as the eras unfold, it won't be that big a difference, because it's just a few rules here and there. But from the first era to our modern era, there's a lot of differences. So some of the eras will be big differences, and the others won't be. So yeah, so I'm hoping by next week the first era will be ready.
Eventually we can see kind of like from Rocky to Creed, the
Right.
offspring, the generations. It'd be great.
Right. Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's
But like I said, we do. I just because right now it's fictional and it's just easy to create random. Random is easy. So I've created really thousands. Can create thousands of boxers pretty easily. Just shoot random number. Whatever. That's pretty easy. But the game does allow you to create people if you want to. Show you how. But it also, if somebody wanted to start working on real fighters to do it, like I said, that is a plan that I do plan on doing. I'm going to make sure I kind of have a better understanding of the original ratings when I do it, because I'm not a boxing historian by any means. If I did, I would have created the first game with all one era having the same rules. But I know over the years I have played a lot of boxing games that had ratings and stuff. So I kind of can have an idea of what some of this stuff looks like. But I want to know a little bit more about it myself before I dive in with the real fighters. But like I said, I've always liked fictional, games. Anyway, I mean, I have a total fictional league on the Pro Strategy Football, computer game, and so I like doing some of the fictional stuff anyway. So.
Who's your favorite boxer? What's your favorite boxing era?
Favorite boxing era would definitely be, I guess what many would call the golden age, but 75, 70 to the 80s, was when I was a kid. Actually, Ken Norton is my favorite boxer. Well, he was until I started doing my historical research more and more. I really am a huge fan of Jack Johnson, of what he had to go through to be the champ. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he was a perfect man by any means. He had his own problems, but going back and looking at a number of his fights and just seeing he was a monster. He was so much bigger than anybody else, and they had to do whatever they could to get the title away from him, if at all possible. He literally chased champions all over the world. They would fight, and they would fight in England, and he would fly. He would figure out a way to fly all the way there just to be in the crowd, knowing that guy was never going to face him, but just to prove that champion was running from him. He wasn't running from that champion. And he had a lot against him. So I right now, like I said, Ken Norton was I remember back when Ken Norton became the world champion. But I think it was 1973, I believe it was. And because at that time I'd have been about 7 years old myself. And so I remember not being able to see the fight, the fight as it unfolded. But I remember my mom telling me the next morning, because I was too old, I couldn't stay up late enough to look at it. So telling me the next morning that he had won. So he's always been one of my favorites.
Favorite boxing movie?
It's hard not to say any of the Rockies. One of my daughters, and this is actually pretty funny. One of my daughters loves the Rocky movies, and we've seen them all, and so my daughter now, I think she's 21 now, but at the time she probably would have been 12 or 13. And we were riding down the road, and she said, so Daddy, what was Rocky's final record? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, how many did he win? How many did he lose? I said, you do know Rocky wasn't real. You'd have thought there was some form of major child abuse happening. The way that she's like, what are you've got to, I never knew that. I never knew that. And so it's hard for just because of that connection with my daughter for the Rocky movies not to be. But I really do because right now, like I said, today I was doing some research on the era where it appeared that there was a lot of mafia influence and stuff. And of course, that's kind of what the movie The Raging Bull is about. That's part of the premise in it. And I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've seen that or not. I feel like I did, but if I did, it was many years ago. And so I don't made up my mind before this week's over with. I'm looking at Raging Bull, and that might move its way up to the top. Yeah, it might.
Nice, nice,
Yeah,
awesome,
yeah,
awesome,
yeah.
excellent. Ronnie, thank you so much for your time, sir. It's been actually very informative, really exciting approach to what you're doing here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. Like I said, I'm not a quote unquote game designer and all that stuff. Like I said, I just never had intention of creating the game. It just kept homebrews kept blowing up to where it was not even the same game I was playing anymore. And there was nothing wrong with the original game. Just my brain wouldn't stop working. In fact, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night going, "Oh, I need to figure out a way for these guys to foul each other." Oh, really? Just let it go. Let it go. But it's
well,
all good, man.
well, thanks for following your passion, man. This is great. Another game enters the world.
It does. It does. I'm excited. I'm excited for it. I'm excited because I think it will just allow you to play a game that is boxing as you know it, but it will if you play the early eras, you'll realize how much things have changed, and so I just think that I think that'd be good for boxing history in general. I mean, because that's what made me dig a little more. That's how Jack Johnson has moved up to the top of my line. Because I've dug more. Of course, I've heard of him, but I did. Once when you're checking out the era in general, and he just keeps popping up, and you go, I need to check into this. So if it makes somebody else dig a little deeper, and just enjoy the history of boxing, I think that'd be really cool. That'd be cool.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Very well said, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for putting up with me.